Hey everybody, welcome back. So I wanted to come on and kind of go back over the idea of intrusive thoughts and what I call kind of Benzo Induced OCD. It's probably definitely top three, probably the top one symptom that I have in this, that in terms of, being the most severe and the most pervasive. And I get so many questions about it and so many emails about it from people, saying, what about this thought? What about this thought? What about this? That I thought I'd come back on and talk about it, and kind of explain what I've learned, what I'm continuing to learn, how to think about it. So, the first thing that I can tell you about how mine began, at least, was I did not have what I would consider, I've said this a million times, I didn't have an anxiety disorder before this, and I certainly didn't have what one would have considered traditional OCD before this happened. I was a very vigilant person. So especially when it came to children and things like that in my family, I was always the one, like, as I've said on these audios before, I was always the one counting heads in the surf, making sure I didn't have more than one pina colada on the beach, if there were children around, because I wanted to be, available and also aware. Just paying attention. If we were in busy restaurants, I didn't let little kids go to the bathroom by themselves. Like, nothing crazy, but definitely more of an awareness, I think, and a little bit of a vigilance. Whether that fits into an OCD category, I wouldn't have thought so. I don't think so now. But certainly as things began to fall apart for me, the third time. So if you remember, my first time was with the antibiotic. When I started on the benzo, my second time was the second time on the benzo back in the spring of 2020. And then my third fall apart was the spring of 2021 when I had to come off all of those 16 supplements. And I basically, for whatever reason, whether it was the supplements or something else, I went into basically an acute withdrawal for many months. In that third episode, so spring of 2021, is really where, to me, most of the suffering of this has come into play. Most of the pain of this has come into play. Not that the other times weren't, but this time it changed me. And I think there were a couple of reasons why. Number one is, I think that I'd already been through it a couple of times. I was pretty demoralized that it was happening again to that extent. I think the other thing is that I was getting worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't figure out what to do about it. And so this is where Claire Week's trajectory of nervous suffering really began to apply for me, even though I hadn't heard of it yet. But when I later learned of it, I went back and tracked this, and it was exactly my trajectory, even though Claire wasn't talking about benzodiazepines. I'll go through the trajectory again, which is, she talks about it begins usually with being indecisive. So something's happening in your life and you have a lot of indecision around it. Okay, that could be, for people that are non-benzo injured, it could be, should I move? Should I take this job? Should I get married? Should I break up? Whatever it is. For me, it was indecision about, should I remove these supplements like they're telling me to? Should I keep them in? Should I hold my taper? Should I continue to taper? Should I updose? It was, as you know, guys, in this process, for every question you have, there's, a million answers, and they're all competing. So as I began to not feel well and, worry about making the right decisions, which again has cost me a lot of energy and a lot of heartache in this, because there really isn't a certainty, as we know, and we're always trying to just do the best we can. But I was really still in the spring of 2021, really I want to find the right answer. Well, in that indecision it moves then into her second part, which she calls suggestibility. And that was very much happening, where I'd go on this forum and it would tell me to do this, and I'd talk to this doctor and they tell me to do this, and I'd talk to this expert and they tell me to do this. And I had like 15 different answers for the same question. And this was not what I wanted at this point, even though now I've kind of come to a place of, I've got to come to the decision within myself and stay with it and find some peace with it. I had not yet come to that place in the spring of 2021. So indecision to suggestibility, and then it moves into loss of confidence. And if you've heard me talk about this before, this is the pivot point for me. When I began to really lose confidence in myself and in the medical and mental health establishment, everything took a really dark turn. Because, again, I had been somebody, and as you may have before this too, that relied heavily on my own wisdom or wit or logic or problem solving ability to navigate life. And suddenly everything was just murky, and every question led to 5 more questions. And I was just getting more and more lost. And I was really losing confidence in my own ability to navigate this process. And then, of course, I also didn't know who else to go to help me navigate it. And then the 4th step after indecision, suggestibility, and loss of confidence is personality disintegration. And this is where we start to feel like we lose our sense of self. We lose our resilience. We lose our our ability to kind of be other focused. We tend to get really kind of self-focused at this point because we're terrified. We start to lose our sense of humor and all the different strengths and defenses that we've built up throughout our lives. This all starts to kind of feel like it's pulling away and falling away. And it's not disintegrating. It's kind of like invisible ink. Like, it does go away temporarily, but as we heal, we do come back to ourselves. Of course, when it's happening, it doesn't feel like that, or that it's going to happen. After the personality disintegration comes lack of reality. These are experiences of depersonalization, derealization, dissociation. And I definitely began to have that, not in a profound way where I would say DPDR was my primary symptoms, but definitely just feeling like time was weird and space was weird, and people in my family, I didn't feel connected to anybody. I didn't know where I fit. I didn't trust myself. Everything just felt odd, and the world felt odd. Me in the world felt odd. Looking in the mirror felt odd. I felt odd to myself. It was very strange. Then that can move into obsessionality, and this is where I think I began to have really my first real bouts of consistent intrusive thoughts, just unwanted intrusive thoughts that are very, very common, not just in people in benzo withdrawal. They're common to people in general, and especially people with any kind of anxiety or going through a stressful time. The problem for us is, our system is kind of glitching out, right? So by the time obsessionality kicked in, all of those other things I just talked about, I was in the midst of. I'd lost confidence. I was highly suggestible. I was feelings of unreality, feelings of not being myself. All of those things had already kind of taken root. And so when the obsessions came in, I just didn't have kind of the mental fortitude to know what to do with them. And I'd never really experienced them in any kind of consistent way. And they really threw me for a loop. And they took hold of a situation from my past that my brain kind of distorted it and threw that story at me through like a distorted lens. And even though I knew it wasn't true, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. I was haunted by it. And this went on. That particular thought stayed with me and was with me almost every day from what would have been April of 2021 until about a month ago. Now, I'm not saying that when it pops up now, on occasion, there's not a whoosh, that feeling of like that comes with it, but not anything near like it had tormented me all that time. And I remember thinking, as that particular thought image would play out in my head for hours a day, or anything I would hear that would remind me of anything having to do with it, I could feel my brain glitch. I would feel that whoosh. I would feel that mental and physical torment. And I remember thinking, I could handle any thought but this one. There's no other thought that would bother me as much as this one. Well, what I've learned in this is be careful what you wish for, right? But before I go on to the be careful what you wish for, let me finish this trajectory. After Claire talks about obsessionality, she talks about apathy, losing interest in things, because you've turned so inward at this point. You're so afraid of your own mind. You're so afraid of your own body. You're so afraid of your experience that the rest of the world, you've lost interest in your hobbies. for us in benzo withdrawal, you feel like you can't even do your hobbies, but we lose interest in things and we're so turned inward because we're in survival mode. And then her final outcome was depression. And she talked about depression as depletion, that, like I talk about it as mental-omics. We don't have endless psychic energy to navigate chronic stress and anxiety or chronic symptoms. And so we get depleted and we can feel very depressed and despondent as a result. So I watched myself go through this trajectory that she spelled out back in the 1960s and 70s, not talking about benzo withdrawal at all, but really talking about anxiety and nervous suffering. And it made a ton of sense to me. Okay. But let's go back to the obsessionality, because that's, again, part of her trajectory. It's certainly a place that I landed. So after many months of all of the rest of it kind of taking shape, I hit that first intrusive thought. And once it hooked on, it wouldn't let go. And what I began to realize, and of course I spent, oh my God, hours and hours and hours listening to every expert that could ever be out there. In my practice before, I knew a lot about anxiety and about OCD. I wasn't an OCD, making air quotes, expert, but I certainly knew enough about it. But I just launched into a full investigation of this because I realized that even though it was induced by this state that I was in, I still wanted to figure out what, if anything, I could do about it. Okay. So here was this unwanted intrusive thought that, again, we all have them. We all think about before you were injured. You probably thought about, what if I jumped off this cliff? What if I slipped off this cliff? What if I pushed that person into the subway? What if I dropped this baby? What if I hurt, whatever. These thoughts come in and we kind of like think about them for a second and dismiss them. We don't really entertain them. We don't get all up in their business. Okay, they don't stick. Unless you have a sticky brain and unless you've got something else going on. And that's where we move into what's called state driving story, that the more heightened you are, the more highly sensitized your state is, which ours are, by the way, incredibly sensitized, the more likely these thoughts are going to come in and the more likely they're going to stick around. Why? Because your brain's going to get stickier and you're going to be more reactive, because we're more reactive to everything. Okay. We're already so afraid of everything. And now here's this disturbing image, memory, thought, urge, and we get freaked out by it. So what I was saying earlier was that this, and I'll come back to kind of some theories that I have and some ways through this, but this particular thought that I had, I just thought it would never lose its grip. And it stuck around for so long. And like I said, I thought any other thought I could handle. I just can't handle this one. Well, on occasion, other things would pop in alongside the other one. Like, what if I screamed out in public? What if I drove my car into traffic? What if I were to yell at one of my loved ones? What if I lose control and I say something horrible? Those kinds of things would come in. They would get stuck. I'd feel the whoosh, but they didn't stick around as long. They didn't have as much impact. It always went back to that original host topic, that original host fear and thought. And like I said, it began to lose grip about a month ago as I began to notice that it started to pick up other things. And so as it dropped the first one, I almost think about it like, that machine you go to in the arcade and it's got that claw that you move around and you drop it down, right? And it picks something up. Well, if you're lucky, it picks something up, right? But it can't pick up a whole lot of stuff, right? So it's not going to pick up the sweet tarts along with the stuffed animal that costs 25 cents that you're spending $500 on using this machine. I think about it kind of like that claw. Like my Benzo Induced OCD brain was like this claw that went down and it found something that mattered to me. And that's the other thing about intrusive thoughts and sticky brain and Benzo Induced OCD in general, is that it's the topics the things that it finds to hang on to are not necessarily meaningful in and of themselves. Meaning we don't have to sit down and wonder, why did it pick my brother, my dad, my mom, this event, this thing that happened when I was 20? Is there something I've got to work through? But it's not random. And what I mean by it's not random is it'll tend to pick things that matter to us, right? So if I don't give a crap about cats, then my thought about, gosh, I haven't seen my neighbor's cat in 2 weeks, probably not going to freak me out too much because I don't really like cats and I don't really like my neighbor's cat. If I loved my neighbor's cat and I actually help take care of my neighbor's cat, and that thought comes in, oh my God, in the middle of the night, I haven't seen that cat in 2 weeks, I might find that I can't go back to sleep. I might find that I have to get up and drive around the neighborhood. And, right? It's latched onto something that matters to me. It doesn't latch onto things that don't matter to us. So we get really confused by that because it twists it, right? So what matters to me are my family. So a lot of my intrusive thoughts centered around my family members. The main one certainly did. What also matters to me is my integrity, trying to be a good person or an honest person or whatever. Have I always been in every situation in my life the most operating of the highest integrity? No, I have not. Right? We're all human beings. I have not. So what happens with my big lint brush of a benzo brain is it goes through and it finds every little thing I ever did that makes me embarrassed or makes me think, ugh, I can't believe you did that, or that's so embarrassing. Why would you have done that? Why would you have said that? And it latches on. Now, I don't need to sit down with each of those incidents and try to make sense of it and make amends. And gosh, let me hunt down that person. Who did I say that to? Gosh, that was 25 years ago. I wonder if, no. But it's not random in the sense that what matters to me is my integrity. So it's going to look for things that when it shows it to me, I cringe or I have a reaction to, okay? If you're a peaceful person, you're probably going to have violent thoughts. If you're somebody who wants to do the right thing, you might worry that you committed a crime. You might worry that you ran somebody over with your car. You might worry that you might hurt one of your children. You might worry that you might hurt your spouse. You might worry that you've done something in your past. You might start to do this negative life review and pick up all of the mistakes you've ever made and magnify and distort them, right? So when I said be careful what you wish for, that's what happened to me, is all of a sudden the claw dropped one and picked up another. Well, this one had the same whoosh and the same impact mentally and physically. And I was like, oh my God. But then it was kind of a clue, okay, this is a totally different thought, not even in the same ballpark, and I'm having the same response to it. I hate it. It's creating this major shame, disgust, anxiety, hatred. And as I'm pushing it away, I want it to leave. I'm getting caught in the same trap. It's like I'm washing my hair with fly paper. The more I try to get rid of it, the more it sticks around. Okay? So when you start to look at how do people who are non-benzo injured look at treating their OCD, they use the gold standard is what's called exposure and response prevention. So what does that look like? Let's just take somebody who has a contamination fear, right? The exposure done by the therapist would be to say, okay, touch that doorknob, okay? And now you're not going to wash your hands. The response prevention is you've associated danger with that doorknob, okay? And your compulsion is to wash your hands to minimize your anxiety, okay? But that doorknob's not actually dangerous, okay? And so that's what would happen in kind of traditional, what they call ERP, exposure and response prevention. And the idea behind it is that the more you expose yourself to the thing that's bothering you, okay, and then you don't do the compulsion to get rid of the anxiety, counting, cleaning, whatever it is, you will habituate, you will get used to the anxiety and it will come down. And your limbic system will see there's nothing to be afraid of. Well, I didn't really like this idea because what I realized is my state is so heightened, okay? And I'm kind of live in a heightened state in benzo withdrawal. So this idea that I could, for example, my original intrusive thought being about a family member. Well, a traditional OCD therapist would say, write a script, write out your worst fears, write out what you're thinking about, right? And then read it over and over and over again. Again, with the idea that I would get used to and bring down the anxiety. It doesn't work for me. And I don't know if it works for you, but because I live kind of in a heightened state, it just doesn't work. So I found this guy. First of all, I started doing the DARE program, which I really highly recommend. Again, they're not benzo people, but they really understand what it is to have a heightened sensitized system and all the different symptoms it can throw out. And even though we still have to deal with the fact that we live kind of in a heightened state, I have found it very, very helpful. I also found a guy named Michael Greenberg, who works in OCD, and he had a little bit of a different approach about thinking about OCD, and I like it for me and maybe for us. His thought was, we don't need to write a script, because he actually doesn't believe in habituation. So whether you do or you don't, it's really not the point. I'm just trying to bring up his theory. He said the rumination is the problem. If we can get rid of the rumination, 95% of the problem is solved. And I actually thought that's really true. And so what does he mean by rumination? Well, rumination is anything we do to try to minimize the response we're having to the terrible thought, feeling, sensation, urge, or image that's entered our brain and is sticking, okay? So whether that's problem solving, assessing, analyzing, researching, just sitting kind of frozen and running it through your head over and over and over again just in fear, whether that's seeking out reassurance on Google, or seeking out reassurance 100 times with a therapist or with a doctor or with a friend. All of these things are forms of compulsion. We tend to think of compulsion as things like washing your hands, but compulsions are also the mental compulsions. And many of us going through this in benzo withdrawal, this is what we deal with, is this real sticky brain, and we hate the thoughts and images and urges and sensations we're having. We get scared by them. We start ruminating and doing all these mental compulsions. So his point was, if we stop doing the rumination, if we stop doing all the mental activity around it, it's going to solve the majority of the problem. And I liked this approach better. So how do you do this? Okay, so one way to think about it is this. I think I told you, one of my really good friends said that really what it is that heightened anxiety, that free-floating anxiety we feel, is always looking for a home. It's looking for a host, right? So it found it for me in that story about my family member. Now it's found it for me in these questions of my morality. It can find it in being afraid of yelling something out. It can find it in being afraid of hurting somebody. So I'm not going to be around knives because I'm afraid to do that. I'm going to, I'm afraid I'm going to hurt myself. It can take all kinds of forms. So whatever this extra agitation, this extra added fear that we have that's circling around, that our limbic system is, on fire, it's sending up all these flares. We've got all this extra energy, and that anxious energy is looking for a home. Okay, we don't have any control over that. Number one, we don't have any control over the energy. We also don't have any control over the home it chooses. Okay, so I don't really have any control over the fact that it's chosen morality, nor did I have any control over the fact that at one point it was afraid I was going to yell something out and hurt somebody in my family, or that somebody in my family might hurt me. I didn't have any choice over those two things, the extra energy and the home it felt. What I did have control over was that I didn't have to, when it found the home, I didn't have to move in to the house that it had found. I didn't have to live in the back bedroom or make it breakfast every day or, be the welcoming committee and every day show up and be like, oh, you're still here? Tell me about yourself. No, we didn't have to do any of that. His whole point, and the point that I think is Dare talks about and I think is most useful, is learning to leave things alone. We don't have control over a lot of what we think, feel, the sensations we have, the urges we have, whatever in this process. We don't have much control over that. We do have, so the awareness of it being there, we don't have much control over that. But the attention we pay, we do. This goes back to that idea I've talked about, the bum at the buffet, and it's poached upon your party, and you're just not able to entertain. You're not able to enjoy your party because you're focused on this one uninvited guest. Okay, rather than leave the guest alone and focus on the 99 other people there, or just let it be. And that's the other thing I think I want to talk about here. We talk a lot about distraction, and distraction can be very helpful. But one of the things that this Dr. Greenberg mentions that I think is also really important is this. If you are, let's say you're trying to solve a math problem and it's not working and it's driving you crazy, right? You don't have to do something else to stop solving the math problem. You don't have to go start solving a chemistry equation to stop solving the math problem. You can simply put the pencil down and stop solving the math problem. And that's kind of his simplistic approach. And again, it might be that we think it's too simplistic. And I'm not saying distraction is bad, but I'm saying if we distract because I hate this thing, so I'm going to go do this other thing, what we're probably going to find is that if I hate this thought, so I'm going to, go in this room and blast a bunch of music or meditate my mind off, or pray for the next 4 hours. Probably I'm going to find that once I'm done praying or meditating or listening to my music, the thing's going to still be there. It's still going to come back. And so he talks a lot about the difference between awareness and attention. We can be aware that the energy has found a home, and we can be aware what that home is. It's afraid to hurt our children, afraid we're going to go insane, afraid we're not going to heal, afraid we're going to get sick, afraid whatever it is. But we don't have to pull up a chair and attend to it. Okay. And one of the things that I have found kind of helpful for me recently is I've thought about, I think I mentioned this in another audio, but I've thought about my mind as being this, and I'm blanking on words because I'm not a hunter, but for people that are, forgive me. But, those machines that you can go off and you can practice shooting these clay pigeons. This machine will like pop them off in the air and you can shoot them down. Well, I kind of think about my benzo brain as being this machine that's just kind of glitched out, like it's just shooting off clay pigeons, all kinds of weird thoughts, sensations, feelings, things I hate, things I wish I didn't have. And it's going kind of crazy, and I don't have any real control over the machine glitching or the clay pigeon. But I don't have to shoot the pigeon. I don't have to aim at the pigeon, focus on the pigeon, and shoot it down. Nor do I have to run into the field and stare at it and look at it and try to figure out what its meaning was, right? So what I try to do when I'm getting just pummeled by thoughts, or I can feel my brain needing, it's got this energy and it's needing to find a home, it's needing to find something to be afraid of. I just remind myself, it's my machine glitching out, and I don't need to chase clay pigeons. I don't need to chase them. I don't need to aim, fire, or assess the damage, okay? And again, this is kind of easier said than done, right? So none of this, what I'm saying, is easy, but I do think that for so many of us, the intrusive thoughts scare the hell out of us. They bring up all sorts of anxiety, shame, disgust. We can wake up and just be anticipating or dreading, oh God, I hope the thought doesn't come again today. But the reality is that it's not the thought, it's not the urge, no matter how disturbing it is. It's that we've become afraid of it, right? And so what we're trying to do is recognize that, again, it's free-floating fear looking for a home. The home it finds has no real relevance, has no real meaning, probably is not random. It will probably find a home in some sort of thing that matters to us. Again, if we are peacemakers, it will be violent. If we value our spirituality and faith, it might be a blasphemous thought or urge. If we value our family, it might be hurting them or them hurting us. Losing control in some way, if we value being in control. We value being sane, going insane, all of these things. It's not random. It's because we're not going to be affected by things that don't matter to us. But the home itself is not meaningful. You don't have to sit down and investigate the home. You don't have to move in, bring it breakfast, become its caretaker. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to address with this. Another example this guy, Michael Greenberg, gave to prove his point, which I think is, again, a good one for us. It's helpful. This idea of leaving things alone. Okay. My friend Patrick talks about it going neutral. Just imagine putting your car in neutral. You can't control if you're in a wave. You can't control if you're in a chronic state of a heightened state of distress, right? You can't control if something, kicks you over the edge. But you can imagine putting yourself in neutral and not getting so, not so much certainly overwhelmed, but not paying so much attention to it, okay? And thinking that we have to do something about it, we have to fix it, we have to problem solve it, we have to review it one more time. Another example he gave was COVID. COVID's there. COVID's a real thing, right? So you can be aware that there's COVID. You can close your eyes and wake up the next day and guess what? COVID's still there, okay? But there's a difference between knowing that COVID's there. Oh, there's COVID again. Yep, there it is on the news. There it is. Oh, so-and-so has it. That's very different than sitting down every day with a spreadsheet and calculating your risk assessment for, what's the risk of you contracting this? What does this person say? What does this person say? Spending 8 hours researching it, looking at all the different things, paying attention to it. He said, and that's the difference between awareness and attention. COVID's not going anywhere. It's there. That thought, that urge, that feeling, that experience, it's just there. We're not trying to necessarily get rid of it. We'd love it for it to go away. I wished that original thought that I had to go away for 18 months or more than that? Yeah, 18 months. All the wishing in the world did not make that thought. I have no idea why that thought went away. I think because I just kept practicing oh, well, there it is again. Nothing I can do about it. But I'm not going to sit down and explore it. I'm not going to not talk to that family member. I'm not going to try to understand, guys, what's the deeper meaning of this? And let me uncover this. And what does this mean? Just like I'm not going to now go back through my life and think, oh gosh, that thing I did when I was 24. Ugh, yuck, cringe. Let me go back and, do what? It's not like there's some amends I could make to anybody other than probably myself. But the reality is, this is the other thing you want to hold in mind with this is, up until I went into benzo withdrawal, these things weren't bugging me. It's not like I didn't know they were there. They just didn't bother me. Why? Because my nervous system wasn't a tin can. It wasn't made of toothpicks and bubble gum. My limbic system wasn't just throwing out random terror and fear looking for some sort of home. Okay? So I wasn't bothered. I wasn't overwhelmed. I wasn't scared of my own mind before. Now I am. And now many of us are. So I hope this was helpful. The idea of you don't have to aim, shoot, or run into the field and check out the clay pigeon. You can just recognize that, yep, my benzo brain's glitching out again. It's latched on to another thought. Because what is that thought? What is that feeling? What is that fear? It's the home for that free-floating anxiety that I feel in benzo withdrawal. And as we fight our thoughts, as we fight our feelings, as we fight all these things, we can, as I've said before, that quote, we can begin to feel that feeling of being insane while you're sane enough to witness the event. That's how we can feel in this. And so a lot of what I'm practicing, and, it's when I say it doesn't always work, what I mean by that is the goal is not to, yes, would I like to get rid of COVID or ever having heard the word COVID? I would. Guess what? That's not going to happen. I have heard the word COVID. I've had COVID. There's nothing I can do about that. So I have the awareness of COVID. How much time I spend thinking and analyzing and fearing and processing COVID is something that I can begin to say, not today, not right now. Doesn't make COVID go away, but I'm making a choice to say, I'm going to practice putting that down. I'm going to practice not aiming, firing, and then going out to look at the carnage in the field about my clay pigeons. Anyway, guys, I hope this was helpful. Happy to answer questions or go into more details about my own experience if it's useful to you.